Hello, guys, and welcome to a Q&A live show with David. I am so excited to talk to David because he is doing so well on his Kickstarter. That is why he's here to discuss the Oz, but also we're going to make it interesting and kind of talk about Kickstarter as a whole, talk about where the industry's at. I have David, who's just, an all-star. I thought, why not ask the big questions? And that is what we're here for. Obviously, in the comments below, you guys could ask your questions as well. Now, I'm going to ask the big question that you have to answer a billion times. But what is the Oz? Explain this to people
sure.
As I screen share it.
So the way that I've been describing the OZ is kind of like, it's what if the Hurt Locker took place in the Wizard of Oz? It's the story of Dorothy Gale's granddaughter, who is a disillusioned Iraq war veteran who finds herself stranded in the war-torn land of Oz. And she discovers that her grandmother killing two wicked witches and convincing the Wizard of Oz to leave, and then clicking her heels together 3 times and splitting, left Oz in the throes of a brutal power vacuum and decades of civil war. And so our new Dorothy is going to have to navigate her grandmother's former friends, the Tin Soldier, the Scarecrow, and the Prince of Lions, if she hopes to survive the horrors of the occupied zone, or as the locals call it, the OZ. So, if you're a fan of Mad Max, the Old Guard, the Wizard of Oz, DMZ, Fables, Fallout, Chrono Trigger, Final Fantasy, we're pulling a lot of inspiration from a lot of really cool places. And I'm really excited with how we sort of are throwing it all together with the OZ.
Very cool. And obviously with Kickstarter, it's already funded, so you're definitely getting the book.
Yes.
By far funded. And you guys have 14 days left. I'm going to put the link in the description so you guys can go check it out. And yeah, you guys are over $30,000 and you have 14 days left, which is amazing.
We're super thrilled just to see how many people came back from our last campaign. I mean, we were talking about this off camera, but it's been a year since our last campaign, and the pandemic is still unfortunately going stronger than ever. And there are no stimulus. There's no stimulus money for people to burn. And the fact that we still have so many returning readers, many of whom are actually spending at higher price points than they did last time. That's really, I think that's really incredible. And I think it speaks to the passion and dedication of our Yellow Brick Road warriors.
And what made you wait a year to do the next campaign? I mean, you had such a big first Kickstarter, which is wild. What made you wait the year?
There were a couple of reasons for that. One of which was, we wanted to make sure we had enough time to fulfill. We fulfilled in a pretty accelerated time frame last time, and if anything, I actually gave us a little bit more runway for our second Kickstarter, just because we made it, but it was cutting it pretty tight. I was doing all the fulfillment out of my 2-bedroom here in Los Angeles, and the ability to maybe spread that out a little bit more, I certainly wanted to do in the next Kickstarter. And also, there was the release of my Aftershock series, Scout's Honor, which came out January through May, and the trade paperback's actually supposed to come out in a few weeks. And with the traction that book had, and it was unexpected even for me, I realized I didn't want my 2 projects to ever cannibalize each other in terms of attention or anything like that. And last but not least, we wanted to give Ruben Rojas, a chance to really build up a good critical mass of pages. Ruben is based in Spain, a COVID hotspot. So there were some COVID-related production delays. And so we wanted to make sure that he had time to sort of get back up on his feet and get everything sort of squared away. And with all that in mind, we were kind of like, well, there's almost a certain poetry to starting this. We started our second campaign almost a year to the day after our first, and we figured, well, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. The timing worked out pretty well for us last time, and I think history has repeated itself a bit.
Now, another go-to question you kind of just have to ask, so I'm going to ask it for the audience, is, what was the difference between doing an issue 2 Kickstarter compared to an issue 1 Kickstarter? What are the things you've learned?
It's a great question. The first issue of the OZ was my very first Kickstarter, and I had no idea how the book was going to be received. I had no idea how many people would join us. Most of my readership up to that point was from the direct market. And I've come to learn that, there are different pockets of readership. There's the direct market Wednesday warriors. There's the people who buy things on Amazon or Barnes & Noble, the Comixology fans or the Webtoons fans, the people who buy their books primarily at cons, and the people who primarily buy their books through crowdfunding. And there's some overlap with some of these constituencies, but they are still, I think, fairly discrete pockets of fandom. And I think it's incumbent upon all of us as indie creators to try to reach out to as many of these different diasporas of readerships and invite them to the same table. But I didn't know how the first Kickstarter was going to do. I thought about it in very conservative terms. I thought, what's the very minimum goal that it's not that I'll be in the black, but just that I won't be so in the red that I'll feel super concerned. And so, I said $6,000 for 30 days. And that was how I was thinking. How do we make that money in 30 days? And I kept thinking of all the tricks that I would do to try to get us across the finish line. Not in a million years did I ever expect we'd be funded in 2 hours. Not ever. And I spent the rest of that campaign playing catch up, thinking like, how do we keep this interesting? How do we, keep it exciting and draw in new readers and keep adding to people's investment, making it more bang for the buck. This campaign, I still prepared for failure because you have to, but I still, but this time I gave myself permission to also plan for success. And so that was why we have so many really cool stretch goals in mind. And we've been kind of building those out for the last 6 months. We have things like, we just announced our Courage Badge enamel pins from the Courageous Lion. If we hit $35,000, that's something that artist Rio Burton and I talked about months ago. And our producer, Promistiax, who made the pins, like we talked about all that with them earlier this year. And I think that's taken a lot of stress off of my plate. And it lets me kind of focus on just the fun of interacting with our readers and kind of doing the carnival barker thing in terms of, being aggressive on social media and making sure that I do interviews. I will say the other difference is that I think I've played a little bit more by Kickstarter's rules. And by that, I mean, the OZ, the first issue, I attacked a lot like a direct market book. You're certain your publicity outlets, you're doing all the interviews, you're doing all the podcasts, you're doing sort of that kind of tour. But a lot of these outlets, and you and I know this, having done time at Newsarama, is it's much harder to get that kind of coverage in a second issue, even if it's a second Kickstarter, even if it's a year later. It's just they don't have the bandwidth to say, well, we already know what the OZ is. Why would we come back to cover a second book when there's all these other new books that we have to cover? Well, Kickstarter has its own rules of how to promote work, particularly in terms of cross promotion. I think to be a good Kickstarter citizen, you owe it to your class, so to speak. If somebody has projects out, when you have an update, you shout out a few other projects. And you don't have to do that in every single update, but you do it often enough just to make sure that, like, hey, your readers might be able to be funneled into somebody else's project and vice versa. It's just a way to sort of cover the widest amount of spread. And I think that's how you become a good member in standing of the Kickstarter community. And so focusing on things like that, focusing on social stretch goals, add-on purchases have been really helpful for this particular Kickstarter campaign. I was really resistant to those. And Tyler James said, you know what, like, it's not going to cannibalize your backer kit, I promise. And so, our numbers have been like steadily growing as a result of that as well. So yeah, it's a different animal than the first one. And you have to remember that, like, some people will come back and some people will be like, did I get the first one? I don't remember. Some people will say, well, I want to wait till the third volume and get everything in one shot. We have some people who, they're a little more conditioned by the direct market and they say, well, we're going to wait for the trade. And I always tell them, then you might be waiting for quite a while, since we haven't figured out plans for a collected edition yet. But yeah, I think, by and large, the response to this Kickstarter has been, I think, uniformly positive. Besides the handful of people who are upset about international shipping growing over the last year, and believe me, I'm more upset than anybody about that. But I think, yeah, it's been not just a learning experience, but it's been one that I've let myself relax a little bit, and I think that's good for me as a human being and as a creator who wants to go the distance.
And do you feel like this has, I don't want to say a second life because it already has a first, second, and third life, but do you think it has a second life in the direct market? Because we've seen so many Kickstarter books, and even, with Substack and all that coming out,
Sure.
Figuring out how that's going to be direct market. But yeah, would you want this in the direct market?
Sure. I mean, I would never say no to the book getting a second life in the direct market. I mean, it'd have to be with the right place. But yeah, I mean, there's been so many books that do that. I mean, Charlie Stickney's White Ash being kind of sort of the gold standard in that regard. But Pat Shand, Destiny New York is getting a second life over at Black Mask. Even Heathen over at Vault, that was originally a Kickstarter book. So I think we as comics fans, we're trained to see things in binary. Marvel versus DC. Creator-owned versus licensed titles, the direct market versus self-publishing or crowdfunding or what have you. And I think we've been seeing it a little in Kickstarter. Scott Snyder and Keanu Reeves last year, but we're also seeing it with the Substack crew. We're seeing it with Scott Snyder with his Comixology and Dark Horse deal. Is that it's no longer an either or proposition anymore. Like I was talking about earlier, there is some overlap between the Wednesday Warriors and the Kickstarter crowd, but it's not huge. I mean, just to get a sense of the differences in metric, we had 1,250 backers for the first OZ Kickstarter campaign. For Kickstarter, that's fantastic. For the direct market, if I was only selling 1,250 books, we're in danger of Diamond pulling the plug on the book. So I don't think that the overlap is as scary as some people might make it out to be, or as outrageous as some people might make it out to be. It's just catering to different markets. And there are ways that you can do it because Kickstarter, you can make it so there's more bang for your buck. There's the stretch goals, there's the exclusive rewards, there's the exclusive covers. In the case of the OZ, every issue is double sized. Whereas, and you're able to modulate all of your purchases. You can do add-ons, you can do different tiers, for people who want to throw down more money to get more stuff. Whereas at a comic shop, it's very much, you're buying the book. You're buying one book and you're buying it at a more accelerated frequency at a lower price point, but that's all you're getting, and so there's definitely ways to cater to both audiences and even for the overlap for people who decide I want to double dip. There are ways that you can do it that people still feel like they're getting bang for their buck, especially in the collector's market. So yeah, I wouldn't say no to the OZ getting a second home, but I want to stress that Kickstarter and the Kickstarter community, they're the first ones that believed in this book. We had publishers express interest, and none of them, put their money where their mouth is. None of them would put a contract in front of us. And so the Kickstarter community is my top priority for the OZ. I am committed to finishing this series on Kickstarter. They will get their books through that platform. And then, if a publisher does wind up approaching us and we're able to give it a second life, with something that's appreciably different, whether it's breaking the book up differently or doing different covers, I'm open to that. But the Kickstarter community is my top priority. I want to keep doing books on this platform. I think it's a great way to interact one-on-one with your readership. I think it's a great way to make books financially equitable and feasible, especially in the indie level. And so I plan on doing more projects on the platform. And that means that we got to treat our readership right. And the OZ is the best place for us to put our money where our mouth is in that regard.
And, we've been obviously talking about Substack again.
Yeah.
Do you feel like an avenue like Substack with the newsletters and stuff are going to have less bigger names come to Kickstarter? Because something I actually saw, I don't know, I guess I could say this, but I found the link. Ryan Stegman and Donnie Cates was originally
that.
going to do a Kickstarter with that big book that they were doing, their indie book, and then obviously they ended up going with Substack, and that would have been huge for the platform.
I'm kind of curious. To be honest, I wouldn't be surprised if they. I still feel like they might come back. You know, I think I could see that team being the first to kind of triple dip, so to speak. You know,
I hope so. I think it'd be so good for the platform.
Yeah, I mean, and I think that is an interesting window that we find ourselves in right now. Is that, like, you know, a year ago I launched the OZ in the same day as Scott Snyder launched his campaign for Noctera. You know, and I know that was a kind of a big boom period. You know, Kyle Higgins did a Kickstarter at that point, and of course Keanu Reeves, you know, with it boom. And you know, now we at this period, because of Substack, we aren't having those like giant names that are throwing in, and so we are getting a little bit less churn, I think, with the Kickstarter community, and that's fine. There are ebbs and flows to it, of course. I do think some of the bigger names realized very quickly that Kickstarter requires fulfillment. And
a lot of work, we should mention as well. I think a lot of creators didn't see that until they started. Like, oh, this is mentally challenging, right? This is
a marathon. You know, you have to keep promoting. And I think a lot of creators, you know, figured, oh, I'm going to put my name down and I'm going to get the money, and then, you know, it'll be easy to distribute the books. And you know, what happens then when your book gets trapped in a boat? You know, that's why I print domestically, so I don't ever have to worry about that. But yeah, it's definitely, I think people saw it as a challenge, and so I do think people have been saying, well, Substack, you know, we're able to tap the digital crowd. We don't have to worry about printing and fulfillment. We'll just go to, you know, Image or Dark Horse or Boom or whatever publishers that they have deals with. So I do think that we will see some bigger name creators. I mean, Jeff Lemire just announced that he's doing a graphic novel on Substack and doing some exclusive Black Hammer stuff. I do think it is a bit of self-selecting, though. You know, I think Substack wants creators who already have a huge following, you know, and that usually means people who, with rare exception, have long careers at Marvel and DC, you know, and so they've picked up that fan base through licensed work, and that fan base appreciates their voice and then goes with them to creator run. And I think I'm sure there might be a few more names trickling in, but that level of fame in your career, not that many people share that, you know, and so I think, you know, I'm curious what happens after the first year. You know, I think, will Substack feel like that they got enough bang for their buck in terms of their investment? I don't know the answer to that. I kind of like where we're at in Kickstarter because we're sort of the hybrid model. You know, yeah, you have the digital accessibility, which makes it easier for people to click and buy, but you also have the physical artifacts of something in a comic shop or the direct market. And so, you know, if somebody just wants to read it digitally, great, they get the PDF. But if somebody wants something that they can hold in their hands, you know, we make it very easy to get that. And I think Substack, it's a challenge to do that. And I think, you know, a lot of this is speculation. You know, I don't think anybody's released a comic yet on Substack. I think James Tynion, is gearing up, and I think he's probably the first. And so I don't know. I think I do think creators like James and Scott Snyder are uniquely insulated in a way that I think even a lot of the other people are not, because they're offering things beyond just making comics. You know, James is offering his column and sort of, it's almost like a tell-all of his time working in the Batman office. And as somebody who does want to spend time working in licensed properties, that's a really eye-opening column for me. You know, that's worth the year subscription, just so I can get that kind of behind-the-scenes perspective. Similarly, Scott Snyder is offering a lot of his courses to his year-long subscribers. And so for me, that's something that, like, I can go back and be like, okay, let me see if there's anything I can pull out of Scott's bag of tricks, to use for me in career development. The concern that I've heard a lot of people voice is just these are direct market creators by and large. There are a handful of exceptions, like Molly Ostertag, for example, that are sort of chaining themselves to a webcomic schedule. And what happens if you don't hit that?
And audience too, because people, like, for me, like, I read a lot of digital books, but when it comes to the indie stuff I normally would get in direct market, I'm gonna wait until I can support my comic book store to do that. And I think that's a big concern, is like minusing the comic book store.
Well, and I think a big misconception that a lot of people have, and this is just the way that the industry is tending to go right now, I think there's a bookstore mentality versus a comic shop mentality.
Because it makes more money. Bookstores, in that regard.
Well, bookstores, usually they want like what's considered a done in one story. I mean, it's not to say that there aren't franchise books, but like even those, like, it's still the full story. It's not serialized in the way that comics are serialized, where it's like you're literally just buying chapter to chapter. And I think a lot of people, especially people who say, I'm going to wait for the trade, they want that whole story in one go. And I understand trades are very attractive. They certainly are a little bit more durable. They look great on a bookshelf. But I think comic shops, by and large, they're living on singles, and a lot of these books, some of them might exist in singles form. I know, I'm conflating that with Scott Snyder's deal with Comixology and Dark Horse, where he said some of these will be done in trade or in singles as well as trade. But, a lot of these books, when they're in trade, that's a very different metric. And I think one that's a lot less helpful to your local comic shop. I can tell you, like, you can order, some comic shops are ordering 20 copies of Scout's Honor in singles. Are they really going to be ordering 20 copies of the trade? Probably not. They don't have the shelf space for that. And I don't blame them. This isn't any series. So, will there be, an increase in demand because the singles aren't there? Maybe. But I don't know. I think it's certainly a gamble, and it's one that I think comic shops, especially when their margins are so tight, I could see them not being willing to roll the dice on that.
And what is going into the Kickstarter model? I think a lot of times what I love about Kickstarter and what a lot of creators love, and why we're seeing people pivot to Substack, is that you're also getting your just dues when it comes to payment, right? When you're like, okay, so much work into this book, it's kind of nice to be paid, because I think a lot of people don't understand the writer puts money on the table a lot of the times to make these books happen.
100%.
So let's say you make $5,000. That doesn't actually mean you're making $5,000. It means you covered your book. Great. Where's my profit that I worked so hard for? So why do you think the Kickstarter has become such a lucrative model? And do you think it is the most lucrative model for creators?
I do think, besides Substack, I think it is the most lucrative platform for creators. And I think the reason that is, I think there's a degree, people see Kickstarter comics as almost artisanal comics. There is that real sense of investment and connectedness to the product that I think you don't even have in licensed books, where licensed books, it's sort of, people are fans of the property. They're fans of Star Wars. They're fans of Marvel or DC. But I think for Kickstarter, people feel connected because they're like, this book exists because of me. And because of like a smaller crew of people. And so people are willing to, I think, pay a little more, because these are sort of artisanal comics coming straight from the creators. They know that, like, there's no publisher to write off any of this stuff. We're paying for everything. We're paying not just for, the art, and that's, line art, colors, lettering, production work, your covers. You're paying for printing, which is not cheap, and you're paying for shipment, which, so you're getting Gemini mailers, you're getting bags and boards. You're paying for postage on pirate shipping or somewhere else, and all those costs really add up. And then you start thinking of the metric. I mean, if you're saying, I'm just going to throw this out, say you're spending $150 a page, just for production costs. Well, that suddenly means that you multiply it by, just even multiply it by 20. And suddenly you're like, oh, that's, these are some significant numbers. And, then you try doing it by 40, try doing it by 120. Making comics is not cheap. So I think Kickstarter is a really great way to making comics financially equitable and financially viable in a way that it's challenging to do both in the indie level and even higher. I can say that I've made, even with paying for my full creative team, I've made more with the OZ than I have any other book I've ever written. And that's without having conventions to sell the book at. And so I think, granted, there are pros and cons, to doing all this. I think one of the reasons why the big two is so popular is not even necessarily the financials. The financials are better there than in some places. And I know, depending on what book you get paid more, but it's marketing. If you're able to say, well, I wrote Batman for 10 years, then suddenly a lot of doors open to you in other places. And those are places that you can really make a lot of money at. So, I don't know. So far, the Kickstarter platform seems really vibrant and powerful. My only concern is, I hope that a lot of publishers don't think, oh, well, we're just going to we're going to turn this into the new pre-order model, because that will drive out a lot of the independent voices that I think have really thrived on Kickstarter as a platform. But I think, is individual creators doing stuff like this, or if it's publishers who, doing kind of one-offs like Boom Studios with their, the Keanu Reeves book, like that's making a big splash. That draws a lot more people to the platform to then give to the little guy, or their Power Rangers hardcovers, which like those are things, it's a big property that you're not going to get anywhere else. But yeah, I think it's definitely a great way to actually make some money making comics, or even just to break even making comics, because like you said, the writer is usually the one responsible for financing the whole project. And that, becomes hard to make that money back if you're not looking at alternate models like Kickstarter.
For sure. And I think I asked you this probably last time we chatted, but I feel like a year has passed and things have changed dramatically. But what is the future of the comic book industry? And I know that's such a big question, but we speak on the direct market as well. Like, how do you feel like new writers are gonna begin their careers, or new artists, or just new creators? What is the path for people?
Well, I think we're finally starting to recognize how fragmented the landscape is, and that this is the case across pop culture. You can say the same thing about cable versus streaming versus sort of all the a la carte streaming options now with Disney Plus and Peacock and HBO Max, just to name a few. Similar to that, we have creators coming in. They're working in sort of the micro indie publishing scene. Your Action Labs, your Source Points, your Scouts, and sort of making a name for themselves through that. There's some people who will, start on Kickstarter, and either they'll get a second life in the direct market, or maybe they won't. Some voices are not meant for this kind of weird publishing, lifestyle that we've got, this publishing market, I should say. And some voices, they are better served going out on their own, and advocating for themselves on a platform like Kickstarter, which is a great equalizer. You've got webcomics people, and yeah, you do have the occasional like Hollywood wannabe, who's like, usually they kind of weed themselves out pretty quick when they realize how hard making comics are. But every
and
so
how much
often,
money it makes. You're like, wait,
yeah,
what? How much do I need to spend? It's like, yeah, no,
yeah.
that's
Do you
that
have
is.
Yeah. Do you have 10 months and $15,000 to spend? Is usually what I tell people out here in LA when they ask that sort of question. And yeah, you'll still have the people who, they sort of fall into it from novels or television or film or what have you. But I think, the future of the industry, I think we're in for an interesting year. I think the Substack thing is going to cause a real vacuum, which I think is only good for indie creators. I think it's going to offer people a lot of unexpected opportunities to step up and kind of make their own, leave their own impact on the industry, and that's really cool. Do I think there might be a glut though for creator owned at some of these places? Yeah, maybe. I'm curious, like what Image and Dark Horse and Boom are doing right now, with these Substack books, assuming that they've been even locked down. Some of them might not be, um, and whether or not that will sort of close some doors for indie people. But I think by and large, I don't want to say the Substack people are abandoning the direct market, because that's, I think, too strong of a word. But I do think they're stepping back a bit. They're trying their own sort of alternative distribution, and God love them. I think that even that is sort of a good thing in certain ways, because it's going to normalize for publishers, like, hey, just because a book came out on Kickstarter, just because a book was a web comic, or whatever alternate means of distribution, that doesn't mean that you've cannibalized your audience to the direct market. So I think that is probably a good thing. But yeah, I think after year one of Substack, that's going to be interesting. That's going to be where we see some people stick around. They've found out that it's self-sustaining enough for them that they can make enough money to make it worth their while. There's going to be some people where the experience is exactly the opposite. They're going to want that infrastructure. They're going to want that more normal routine in the direct market. And meanwhile, what's going to happen if Substack just says, actually, we just threw in $10 million or however much, I'm speculating, and maybe we didn't get 10 million back. So is that something that we really want to continue to fund? And that might also self-select what sticks around on the platform. So, I wish I had a crystal ball, because obviously I'd probably be doing something more lucrative than comics. But I feel like we're in for an interesting road ahead. I hope really the only the concerns that I have are direct market related. Is what's Diamond going to look like a year from now? What's sort of the chain of comic shops that have sort of hitched their wagons to Diamond going to look like? And what are the independent publishers that don't necessarily have a deal with Lunar or Random House or Simon & Schuster? What are they going to do, if anything happens to Diamond? So, hopefully, the people at Diamond, they're resourceful. So hopefully they can stay afloat and keep the publishers that rely on them afloat. But otherwise, I think, there's going to be some publishers that are going to have to take a long, hard look at the way they do business and figure out what's the alternative.
And is there other means and mediums that you would like to explore? You mentioned webcomics a lot. Something I've been doing in the past 2 months is Webtoon. I found a wonderful audience there. And obviously it was a project that was meant for Webtoon, so that's why I did it. But Webtoon, that's a whole different beast. And also DC just made their deal with Webtoon. Is that something you want to explore?
I would love, honestly, I was so jealous when I heard about the Webtoon deal with DC, because from what I understand, they're going to be working exclusively with Webtoon creators. And what I wouldn't do to write a Webtoon Shazam book,
right?
Or a Superman series. I mean, it would be amazing. Webtoon, if there's a way to do it in a sustainable fashion, because I think a lot of people do not realize how hard it is to do. Like I've been watching Justin Jordan with his webtoon Urban Animal. And boy, I counted out all the panels and I was like, oh, he's writing like a ridiculous amount for this. And his artist is drawing a ridiculous amount for this. And I'm kind of like, honestly, like I know I'm sure he's making decent money off of it, but I'm just like, I wouldn't be able to sustain that pace. Like that is a marathon. I would love to, honestly, I'd love to do something with Comixology and Dark Horse. I've been friendly with Chip Mosier over there for a long time, and haven't found like the right project over there yet. But that would be a really cool thing. I think Scott Snyder has done some really inspiring stuff over there, and I think offering to these different pipelines, I think is really interesting. Beyond that, I mean, I want to kind of keep one foot in the Kickstarter pool and one foot in the direct market. I think the two audiences sort of feed towards one another, which I think is really important to kind of keep that churn going. I think for me, it's more about sort of the quantity of my content, just kind of getting more stuff out there, playing around with different genres. But yeah, I would love to, I think, try some of these more digital platforms, especially because now we're realizing like it's not just digital only anymore, but it's a great way to meet people where they're at, for the people who have no interest in print media, and then have something sort of. It's okay, Ruby. Sorry, my puppy is being very anxious right now. Stop that. Anyway, having sort of that print artifact, it winds up, you're not double dipping as much as you're hitting two very different audiences. So.
And how do you feel like superhero comics are going to be affected by all this? Because I think that's been the big question. And I guess that definitely dives into indie comics as well, because you feel like maybe some of the indie circuit people that are only been indies will dive into Marvel and DC a bit more, because a lot of their big names are not at Marvel and DC anymore. What do you think that looks like, and how does that affect everybody else? What's the ripple effect of what happens with Marvel and DC?
I think we're going to see. I think we're going to see a new crop of people popping up, 100%. I think there are going to be indie creators who have been sort of in the trenches for a while, and they're going to get called up to the big leagues, I think, in an unexpected way. I think it used to be we had such a glut of talent. Just a lot of people, they're trying to get in, and there's only a finite number of spaces. And so that's why you'd see so many people doing backup stories. You'd see them doing one shots, maybe a mini. And I think it's going to accelerate. I think we're going to be seeing, a crop of talent getting thrown into the deep end of the pool. And I think that's exciting. I think oftentimes any sort of entertainment media has the problem of it's very crowded at the top. There are people who sort of get to that upper echelon at a Marvel or a DC, and why would they leave? It's job security, and it's decently paid. And some of them will sort of, dip their toe in the creator-owned pool, but by and large, they're still building that fan base. Not many of us get a chance to do, a 10-year run on a flagship character like a Scott Snyder or a Dan Slott. So yeah, and I see I'm already seeing Marvel's doing some interesting things. They had all their announcements today, with Avengers Forever and Timeless, and the lives and deaths of Wolverine, and a new She-Hulk book. That sounds very exciting.
Rainbows on that. I'm very excited.
Yeah, and I'm very curious what they're going to do with Moon Girl and Double Dinosaur, because they're not even revealing the creators yet. So I feel like that's going to be interesting. So yeah, and DC, DC's trying new things. They're a little different because they're sort of under a new regime, so to speak. And I'm not sure anybody quite knows, where the leadership's going to take them. But that can only be a good thing. I think there's definitely going to be some big changes going, especially, James Tynion off, leaving Batman. It's sort of, I think I this is me purely speculating, but I think there's going to be a lot more in Joshua Williamson's hands. I think Matt Rosenberg is going to be having a really interesting act 2 over at DC. Tom Taylor, I honestly wouldn't, this is me purely speculating, this is pure guesswork on my part. If DC doesn't offer Tom Taylor an exclusive in the next 2 years, I'm going to be shocked.
Right. Well, if he, I think he loves playing in both sandboxes, but how much time do you do that for, right?
And I think that, and this is not a knock on Marvel, because I love Marvel and I love what Tom's doing at Marvel, but I think DC is giving him the opportunity for bigger swings right now. Suicide Squad, I think, was a big swing for him. Nightwing is doing gangbusters over there. And to be honest, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think he was doing a little bit in the Superman office, now.
He's doing the John book right now.
Yeah, he's doing the John book. And so, I think, maybe he likes playing in both sandboxes, so maybe he won't accept that exclusive. But I feel like Tom is the guy who should be leading.
100%. Yeah. I mean, what's so great about his career has been that he's played in all these different sandboxes, but I think he's learned a lot because of it. But he did start at DC. He started with Injustice. So why not go back?
Talk about a book that I would not have expected much out of.
Right? I don't think anyone did, out of a digital first book.
Yeah. And it's like a perennial bestseller over there. And so so DC is a little bit more opaque to me, but at the same time, I think that's almost been like DC's brand over the last 15 years. It's just they are all about reinvention, and they're all about trying new status quos. And I think they're still in kind of a little bit of a shakeup period, and I think that's representative by James passing the baton off rather than sticking around for whatever his sort of overarching goals were. And so, I think there's some potential for some really cool stuff over there. There's also some potential for just being lost in continuity nonsense for forever. But I love those characters. I think they're really iconic, and I think there's some potential for some very cool stuff, especially with the 5G initiative. John Kent, I think people are really glomming onto him in a way that I think people didn't expect even 5 years ago. And the Aqualad becoming Jackson Hyde becoming the new Aquaman. Brandon Thomas deserves a lot of credit. He's really, I think, kind of the unsung hero of that new crop of writers. The new Batman. It's interesting. It's sort of a whole new cast of legacy heroes. It's kind of like Marvel in the 80s, or maybe it was the 70s, whenever the Silver Centurion armor was a thing. I always hope for the best for Marvel and DC, because I do think, a rising tide really does float all boats. A healthy Marvel and a healthy DC, I think, keeps the industry strong for everybody. And I think we haven't had both of them in a strong position simultaneously in a while. And so I hope for the best for everybody, because strong Marvel and strong DC means strong everybody else.
I 100% agree. And even taking away from story things DC's doing, I will say something I've enjoyed that they've been doing over the past couple of years is figuring out the market maybe a little bit more than Marvel has, where they've done YA graphic novels, they've done the webtoons, they've done the anthologies. As much as, is that a good idea or a bad idea? Right. I do like that they're trying
out new talent. It's they're trying a whole bunch of different things, and honestly, I don't think that's a bad thing. I think sometimes DC can be in danger of trying of shaking things up so much that they forget what made them special in the first place. Whereas you could make the argument that Marvel, they focus a little bit more on the core stuff, but at the detriment of expanding past the core stuff. And so I think there's strengths and weaknesses to both companies and their approaches. If they can each find something that like works and catches on, then I really hope that they stick with it. Because like there's all these demographics, there's all this different readership, and I think we're also kind of hitting the tail end of, we had comics films, we had comics movies for so long, and I don't think we ever really effectively capitalized on it. And now we're sort of, I think, in the late stages of that. I'm very curious what the reaction to the Robert Pattinson Batman movie is going to be. Although, to be fair, the reactions even to Batman v Superman and Justice League were very polarized. And I think the window for drawing more people in the same way that The Walking Dead drew more people is, I think, closing faster than we want to admit.
Yeah, there's so many projects. I mean, we did have hits like The Boys and Invincible, but those are all books are over. So what are you really supposed to do besides like, firepower's out? I do agree that we kind of missed that boat to sell comics at movie theaters and things like that. But there's definitely people that love superheroes, and I still think there's a market that people haven't hit, especially when it comes to teenagers. I feel like teenagers love comics, and that goes back to webtoons. Even like, people my age, like mid-20s, like a lot of my friends just check out webtoon, and it's a shocking amount. Even just doing Comic-Cons in the past month and showing a webtoon thing where that person wouldn't have been interested in a comic, and then you're like, oh, webtoon, that's really cool. And that's why I think the DC partnership is so interesting. It's like, oh, you can really get people. But if you're not making it serialized, are you getting anyone? I don't know.
Well, and it's trying to introduce also superheroes to a different audience. I mean, I think people love the superheroes in the films because they're able to kind of glom onto a particular actor's portrayal, and it also helps that like the movies, they're serialized, but they're not serialized in the way comics are serialized. I mean, you serialize anything the way that you serialize comics, the batting average is going to go down. Just it's statistics, whereas the movies, like there's too much money at stake to mess around too much. They're going to cast one of the Chris's, because people like the Chris's. And so people will like Captain America because they like Chris Evans. Will that necessarily translate to a comic? It hasn't happened yet. But I think DC doing stuff in Webtoon, they're like, oh, well, like, we're sort of meeting, to sound like an old man, we're meeting the kids where they're at, and so if they're reading Webtoon, maybe if we're able to sort of shift the aesthetics a little bit in a way that focuses on the ongoing story, but also like the emotionality of it all. It's not focusing on crossovers. It's not focusing on continuity beyond the internal continuity of the series. That I think is, that's a win-win, and it's a storytelling model that doesn't work in the direct market. I mean, but who knows? I mean, maybe Webtoons will be doing a whole bunch of different crossovers, and I'm just being an idiot. But I think if it were me anyway, I think you want to make each Webtoon as strong as it can be, and then being like, oh, if you want more, check out this other book, as opposed to forcing people to go from strip to strip to strip to strip. I think the actual model of Webtoon and the way that the site is designed doesn't play well with the direct market crossover paradigm.
I think that's interesting, is that the partnership is definitely more for the Webtoon readers than it is for the Wednesday Warriors to go to Webtoon. And I think that's definitely the right path because of that, because you're trying to get those readers.
It goes down to just the way that people are reading these books. I mean, the Wednesday Warriors, they want something in their hands. They want that stack. They want their shelf full of trades. The Webtoon people, they're reading it on their computers, or they're reading it on their iPad, or they're reading it on their phone. And that's a different type of reading experience. It is more akin. It's sort of semi-akin to the Comixology guided reader, but even that is not really a one-for-one analog to the Infinite Scroll. And there are different storytelling things you can do with the Infinite Scroll that you can't do in a print comic. Although, you have to be careful about that, because if you want to have a second life in print, you got to play within the rules somehow. I think, ultimately it comes down to, there are people who want comics. I don't think that comics as a medium is going anywhere. I think the way that comics as our industry is currently situated, that might change, and that might change dramatically in the next 10 years or 20 years when people become, when the inertia towards the comic shop model gets less and less for people who were never conditioned that way, for people who did read their stuff on Webtoon. And that's just the way that they're used to reading now. I think our kids, will they be going to a comic shop every week? I don't know. But will they be reading stuff online? 100%, assuming it's not just beamed directly to their retina.
Yeah, for sure. That'll probably end up happening as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, we are getting to the hour point, so I guess we'll start wrapping up. But is there anything obviously you want to plug the Oz, which we're gonna share one more time. Here is a screen share for the Oz, which literally just got another backer. We shared it.
Thank you.
Join 2 backers. Join 768 backer and back up this project. Go check it out. Also, we should announce that if you back up both the Oz and Buy Visibility, which is, don't want to show my dashboard, I'll show the actual project. If you want to back up Buy Visibility, we will give you a PDF of The Dancer and issue 1, and then also Going to the Chapel issue 1. So hopefully you guys could back up both projects.
Yes. And I will say that, yes, anyone who backs the OZ will be getting a PDF of The Dancer. That is part of our digital comics extravaganza. So that is already a stretch goal that has been smashed. So yes, any backers, both digital and print, will be getting this. So definitely back it because and definitely check out the Buy Visibility anthology, because seriously, it's such a great it's a great cause. It's a great way to put a spotlight on a community of writers and creators who don't necessarily get the kind of spotlight that they deserve. And so I've really admired seeing kind of Murderer's Row of talent that you guys have involved, especially Dominic Bustamante, who maybe if people back the OZ a lot, you might see a little something extra from them. So kudos to you. I'm so excited to see that you guys are as of this recording, you're only $700 away from funding. So I'm very excited for you to be doing that victory lap tonight or tomorrow. It is well deserved and well earned.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. And yeah, Dom was wonderful to work with. He actually worked on my stories, so that was really cool. But yeah, thank you. I'm very appreciative of that and very excited about the project. And hopefully it'll do great by the end. It's already doing good, but I'm really excited to see where it can go. But yeah, thank you guys all for watching. Really appreciate it. Go back up the OZ. Go check it out, and go check out all of David's other projects as well. Is there anything else the Scouts Honor do you want to plug as well?
Yeah, the trade paperback for Scouts Honor hits comic shops everywhere September 22nd, assuming we don't have any more delays with our shipping vessel. And it'll be hitting bookstores and Amazon the first week of October. And then, if you're interested in any of my other books, Spencer and Locke, Going to the Chapel, Scouts Honor, we actually have tiers on the OZ where you can get all of my trades in one shot. Otherwise, you can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at PeposeD or David Pepose Comics on Facebook. You can subscribe to my newsletter, Pep Talks, at bit.ly/pepnews, or visit my website at davidpepose.com.
Very cool. And thank you guys again, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye.